Hi, in this tutorial I will show you how to create an isometric grid in Photoshop and then how to set it up in 3D scene with the correct camera settings for isometric. We will create basic models in 3D which we will use as a basis to overpaint in 2D. This is not a tutorial that will explain how to paint in 2D or how to model in 3D. This tutorial assumes that you have a good knowledge of 2D and 3D skills. The focus of this tutorial is on how isometric works and how to get your files ready for an easy workflow. Let's jump into the tutorial. There are various versions of isometric dimensions. The widely used dimensions which we will be using is the 1x2 version. Let's quickly create a grid in Photoshop to see what a 1x2 isogrid looks like. Use the marquee tool and while holding Shift drag a square, then fill it with a solid fill adjustment layer. Go to the select menu, use modify and contract to make this selection smaller by 1 pixel. Make sure the mask icon is selected and that your background color is set to black. Press the delete button to get rid of the inside of the square. Make sure that snapping is on by going to the view in the top menu and look for the checker mark on snap. We want to duplicate the square and snap it to the others. Using the move tool, hold Alt on the keyboard and draw a new square to duplicate it. Select the 2 square layers and repeat the process. To rotate the grid by 45 degrees, press Ctrl T on the keyboard. While holding Shift, drag on the outside of the grid to rotate it. Then press Enter to apply. Transform the grid again and this time set the height to 50%. In a few easy steps you have created a perfect 1x2 isogrid to start creating isometric art. As we have discussed so far, a 1x2 isometric grid is twice as wide as it is high, so let us quickly test our grid dimensions. Drag a new square marquee and fill it with a solid fill adjustment layer. Duplicate it and drag it next to each other. Group them and drop the opacity for this layer group. Using the transform tool, drag the 1x2 fill to the bottom corner and scale it to see if the sides of it will touch the corners of the grid on all sides. If it did, then your grid is perfect for creating isometric art. Now that we have established the principles behind the isometric grid, we will look at how we can use 3D to assist us in creating faster and more accurate isometric art. Let's fire up Blender for this. Go to the camera settings on the right hand side panel and set it to orthographic. You can set the zoom by adjusting the orthographic scaling. I am moving the cube up by 1 Blender unit and then move the camera up on the Z-axis to center the cube in the camera's view. Seeing is believing, so let's test our settings. I screenshot the view from the camera and paste it into Photoshop. Then using transform proportionately, I scale and place this image from Blender to fit the isogrid in Photoshop. As you can see, the camera settings from Blender fits well with the 1x2 grid we have created in Photoshop. This means we can create basic meshes in Blender and import this image into Photoshop to be overpainted. I used the isometric grid in Photoshop to draw these ruins in 2D. Using the 3D workflow will speed up your work and keep it more accurate. Now let us do some basic modeling. Make sure your model's origin is always set to the center of the world so that you can easily make adjustments to real-world measurements. As said in the introduction, you will need to have a good knowledge of 3D modeling for this stage of the process. You will see me cutting loops and extruding faces on the mesh. You don't need to do all of the work on one mesh. You can always add other objects like pillars to the structure. The idea is to keep it rather simple in 3D. We will add all the details in 2D. Most of the creative work should be done in 2D. We could render this scene now, but seeing that we are going to overpaint this anyway, we can do a dirty screenshot with the wires enabled. Just to demonstrate how I use the 3D model in 2D, I have painted over it in this time lapse. I plan to make more in-depth tutorials on painting 2D assets in Photoshop for game art. I hope you found this short tutorial useful. Please leave a comment below if anything was unclear. Remember to have fun.